So what I'm seeing is we're attacking details. We're coaching the heck out of them. The guys have great spirit. They're trying their tails off, and we're making the most of every day. So we got to stay the course.
Now imagine if I told you that your favorite NFL team is going to have a 10-7 season with a new head coach in his first year. You would be like, oh, bet, I'll take that, and we're going to make the playoffs. Well, unfortunately, you won't make the playoffs, and if it's not obvious by now who I'm talking about, this was the reality for the Seattle Seahawks in the 2024 season. And in this NFL season preview for the Seattle Seahawks, we're going to be talking about if they can compete in the NFC. And there's a lot of factors why they didn't make the playoffs. Really simply put it, they were on the wrong side of a rare tiebreaker that they have with their divisional opponent in the Los Angeles Rams. The Seahawks and the Rams both finished with a 10-7 record in the 2024 season, but the Rams ended up winning the division because they had a higher strength of schedule and they had a higher winning percentage than the Seahawks did. So simply put it, that was the reason why the Rams won the division and made the playoffs and the Seattle Seahawks didn't. But albeit though, despite them not making the playoffs, I think it was really a step in the right direction for the Seahawks. They didn't make the playoffs in 2023. In that season, in the final year of Pete Carroll being the head coach, they had a 9-8 record. So they were teetering around a similar level. They made it in the 2022 season, but missed it in 23, and they missed it last year as well. But they did win a game more last season, so that's technically improvement. And with Mike McDonald in his first year as a head coach of the Seahawks, I think he did a really good job. They had a strong start to the season as well. They had started 3-0 at least in the first few weeks of the season, but then lost 3 straight. But then they were able to get things back on track. They swept the Cardinals when they played against them in the division in the season series last year. And as previously mentioned, they split games against the Rams and split games against the 49ers as well in their division and played teams great. And as we all have known, even in the Pete Carroll era, specifically when they won Super Bowl 48 and in the years that they made Super Bowl 49 with Dan Quinn as defensive coordinator with the Legion of Boom defense, their identity has been honed for a decade plus now on a defensive end, even with different players nowadays. If you look at last season in 2024, they ranked 14th in total defense. In passing defense, they ranked 11th. They were a little bit lower in rushing defense, ranking 16th, but in scoring defense, they were 11th overall. And in defending the red zone, they were top 10, tied with the Arizona Cardinals at number 9. So they were very efficient on the defensive end, alongside with a solid offense that ranked 14th as well. And they did have a different quarterback with Geno Smith starting, and that's a huge factor I want to talk about. The two guys in the thumbnail with a Sam Darnold and a Cooper Kupp. And there's no question the changes this team has made. First and foremost, I think the biggest move that the Seahawks made this offseason was trading DK Metcalf to the Pittsburgh Steelers for their 2025 second round pick and the 2025 7th round pick. It's for sure going to be hard to replace the production that DK had in his 6 seasons in Seattle, accumulating for over 6,300 receiving yards, nearly 50 touchdowns with 48, and having all of that in 438 receptions. And last year specifically, just falling shy of what would have been his 4th 1,000 plus yard receiving season, having 66 receptions for 992 receiving yards and 5 touchdowns. It's going to be hard to replace that type of production. A lot of fans of Seattle will be looking like a player like a Jackson Smith and Jigma, who had a really good sophomore season to take another step last year, because after having 63 receptions for 628 receiving yards and 4 touchdowns in his rookie season, last year he added 500 plus receiving yards to that stat line. In 2024, having 100 receptions for 1,130 receiving yards and 6 receiving touchdowns. He was really good as a slot receiver, utilized last season in motion and different splits with Geno Smith. And it'll be interesting to me to see how in Clint Kubiak's system as offensive coordinator, he was previously the offensive coordinator of the Saints last year, how Jackson Smith and Jigba will be utilized even more with a Sam Darnold, who is a different type of quarterback than Geno Smith. Yes, they're both pocket passers to an extent, but I have a lot of questions, I'm not going to lie, about Sam Darnold. But before I get into those questions though, I also want to talk about them acquiring Cooper Kupp. Really love that move. I think, probably in my opinion, I think it's easy to say that he's the greatest receiver in Rams franchise history, although Puka Nacua could be on track to be even better. But winning the Triple Crown and Super Bowl MVP in the 2021 season was incredible. In the last few years since though, let's be blunt, Cooper Kupp has certainly been injury prone. After playing 16 games in 2019, 15 in 2020, and 17 in the season that he won the Triple Crown in 2021, he's missed time in the past 3 seasons in 22, 23, and 24 due to different injuries. In 2022, he only played 9 games, and last year and in 2023, he played both 12 games those seasons. And we know that he's getting older. Cooper Kupp is 32 years old now. You kind of can't blame the Los Angeles Rams for deciding to move on from him to Davante Adams, who was around the same age, but is still putting up great production. And Davante Adams himself had over 1,000 receiving yards last year compared to Cooper Kupp, who had 710 receiving receiving yards, who was still effective when he played, but still not that same player that we saw have nearly 2,000 receiving yards in the 2021 season. I'm interested to see how rejuvenated Kupp will be in this Clint Kubiak offense alongside of a Sam Darnold at the quarterback position. And I'm not going to crap on Sam Darnold throughout this video, I'm not going to lie, but I'm not as high as a lot of people have been in terms of the people who have the takes of, oh, the Minnesota Vikings should have kept him. No, they shouldn't have. First and foremost, the Minnesota Vikings decided to draft JJ McCarthy and trade up for him in the first round of the 2024 NFL draft at the 10th pick overall for a reason. Sam Darnold was brought in for insurance and he won that starting job and he played great last season. Don't get me wrong. We can talk about his stats real quick because we're going to analyze every single player that we talk about before I give my reasoning of why I'm not as high on a season that he had. He had over 4,300 passing yards, 35 passing touchdowns, which ranked 5th, and 12 interceptions and having a QBR of 60.4. He had an amazing season. Don't get me wrong. Now, before I get into the counter arguments of why I think that it wasn't all just him, don't get me wrong. Like I said, he had a great season and by far the best season of his career. Let's not act like that Kevin O'Connell isn't a mastermind. He won NFL Coach of the Year last season, and he's recognized for being one of the greatest offensive minds in the league. He was also, mind you, the offensive coordinator for the Los Angeles Rams, who won in 2021, that also had Cooper Kupp and other players like that. So I'm telling you, Sam Darnold had a lot of help in terms of also the receiving game and Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson, a running game with Aaron Jones that played really well too, and that Vikings defense, which ranked 5th in scoring defense and 2nd in run defense, one of the best in the league overall. He had a lot of great factors that put him in great positions to win, but as we all know, what happened in the final 2 weeks of the season? First, in week 18, for an opportunity to not only win the NFC North division, but also be the first seed for the NFC conference and have a bye week before the divisional round. It was a pretty shiny game. Completed only 18 of his 41 passing attempts, having a 43.9 percentage, so essentially a 44% completion percentage. Had 0 touchdowns, was sacked 2 times. Obviously, that's an offensive line factor as well too, but also sometimes he would hold on to the ball too freaking long. And in that game against the Lions in week 18, the Vikings lost 31-9, and they weren't able to score any touchdowns. They were only able to get on the board via field goals, and people are like, all right, that was a bad game for sure, but they'll be ready to play against the Los Angeles Rams in the wild card round, surely, right? Well, we all know what happened then. Darnold was sacked 9 times by that insane Rams pass rush that was just able to dominate not only the Vikings offensive line, but really just control the psyche of Sam Darnold's decision making, and it was just an utter mess of how that team performed. Sam Darnold in that game, he completed 25 out of his 40 passing attempts. That's efficient for sure, but that's a lot of passing attempts, throwing the ball 40 times, throwing for 245 passing yards, 1 interception and 1 touchdown. Just a bad game, and I think that definitely played a factor in terms of them being okay with putting the reins to their first round pick into JJ McCarthy, who in my opinion would have at some point started last season anyways if he was healthy, if he didn't tear his meniscus in his right knee last season. And I know Seattle fans, y'all probably like, ugh, really? You're just bringing all this up and he's now our starting quarterback. I know that might be a bad sign, but you can trust the scheme potentially of a Clint Kubiak because he has came from previous regimes like a Minnesota Vikings, like the Broncos, the 49ers, who we know with Kyle Shanahan, and recently the New Orleans Saints, where he was offensive coordinator for them last season. He had a couple of solid moments. He was a part of the Saints team that started off very strong last year, very shortly though, before they ended up thudding out and being one of the worst teams in the league. But he was offensive coordinator there, so we'll see how he's able to put Sam Darnold in positions to win. Like I said though, guys, it's encouraging though because Sam Darnold, he played the best season of his career last season. Before having those 35 touchdowns and 12 interceptions last season, we can all acknowledge that he was in a terrible situation with the New York Jets his rookie year, throwing for 17 touchdowns and 15 interceptions. 2019, 19 touchdowns, 13 interceptions. 2020, 9 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. And then 2021, 9 touchdowns and 13 interceptions. So it's certainly been a rocky road for Sam Darnold, certainly, but last season, like I said, it was his best season for sure. So that's the momentum that at least you can be encouraged by as a Seattle Seahawks fan going into this season, because he learned how to play the right way and play competent football. But those last 2 games against the Lions and the Los Angeles Rams were the last 2 games that he had on tape as well, and that resembled the old Sam Darnold. So hopefully he's washing that, putting that film in the trash, and hoping to be resurged on this new Seattle Seahawks team that has a lot of promise. I mentioned some of the receiving corps, obviously, with Jackson Smith and Jigma, Cooper Kupp, and even a guy like a Torrey Horton, who was their 5th round pick this year in the 2025 NFL draft, who has apparently been making a lot of noise least in training camp, that's a good thing because that'll be another wide receiver to complement players like a Njigba and a Cooper Kupp. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention guys like Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. Now, specifically last season for Kenneth Walker, it wasn't great because he only played 12 games and dealt with some injuries. Last season, he only had 153 carries for 573 rushing yards and 7 touchdowns. But if you look at previous seasons in his rookie year in 2022 and 2023 afterwards, he had insane production. In his rookie year, he had 228 carries, over 1,000 rushing yards and 9 touchdowns. In 2023, he had 219 carries for 905 rushing yards and 8 touchdowns. Certainly one of the more solid running backs in the league, I believe, for sure. And even as Zach Charbonnet, I think he's a perfect complementary back to a Kenneth Walker. And as last season, he was able to step in times when Kenneth Walker also was out and provide some solid production. I know from a fantasy perspective as well too. He was a guy a lot of people leaned on when a Kenneth Walker was injured. But if you look at his stats throughout his 2 seasons, last year in 2024, he had 135 carries for 569 rushing yards. And even in the receiving game as well too, he was really efficient, had 42 receptions for 340 receiving yards and a touchdown. And then in his rookie year in 2023, he had 108 carries for 462 rushing yards and a touchdown. So definitely 2 running backs that I think complement each other well in that system, and hopefully we'll be able to relieve some pressure from a player like a Sam Darnold having to drop back all the time. He can be in the play action a lot, and they can really marry the run and the pass game together to be efficient against opposing defenses this upcoming season. My whole Sam Darnold point though makes it more interesting and intriguing from the perspective that they drafted Jalen Milroe in the 3rd round, 92 overall out of Alabama. He is a dangerous runner out of the backfield at the quarterback position as a dual threat quarterback. I think it's not hyperbole to say this. In terms of a running perspective at the quarterback position, I think that he's the best running quarterback prospect since Lamar Jackson in the 2018 draft, and we know how great Lamar Jackson is. I'm not comparing Jalen Milroe at all in terms of a total overall skill set or even the running ability in a nutshell in terms of being on the same level, but in terms of having some dangerous big play ability out the running game at the quarterback position, Jalen Milroe has had the best since Lamar Jackson in his draft class. And I think that Jalen Milroe, we will see him a lot throughout this preseason, as we saw him yesterday in a preseason game against the Las Vegas Raiders, complete 6 out of his 10 passing attempts, throw for 61 passing yards and have 38 rushing yards. Had some solid moments, and this is some really good reps for him in the preseason alongside with what he has had in training camp. And I like what he put on tape against the Raiders, even though that game ended up in a tie. But mind you, Drew Lock also played in that game too. Jalen Milroe, he's going to have the opportunity to step in and show why he can be the future quarterback of this team, and maybe even provide a way potentially if Sam Darnold doesn't work out well to get out of that deal and give Jalen Milroe the reins, because he has that ability. There was even a point last year after the Georgia game where a lot of people viewed him as being a top 5 pick, but there was a lot of inconsistency for him throughout last season, and we can go through his stats as well, kind of reflected that. Passing wise, there was a lot to be desired. Last season he threw for under 3,000 yards, throwing for only 2,800 passing yards, throwing for 16 passing touchdowns and 11 interceptions. At the running game though, as I mentioned though, he was very efficient. He had 168 rushing attempts for 726 rushing yards and 20 rushing touchdowns. That is not normal. 20 rushing touchdowns. That's what I'm saying, guys. He is crazy as a dual threat quarterback, and that essentially made his stats, in my opinion, overall look better, as he had a total of 36 touchdowns and 11 interceptions last year. And compare that to his 2023 season when the Alabama Crimson Tide made the college football playoff but lost to Michigan, who would eventually go on to win a national championship that year. And Jalen Milroe, he did have similar stats in terms of a passing perspective, but he was more efficient in terms of his completion percentage, had 23 passing touchdowns and only 6 interceptions, so a way better ratio compared to 16 and 11 last season. And then rushing wise, a little bit less than he had last year in 2024, having 531 rushing yards but also 12 rushing touchdowns, 2 on 161 rushing attempts. So we've seen a good dose of Jalen Milroe throughout his career be efficient. Also, mind you, in 2023 season, that was the year where Nick Saban was still trying to see who the quarterback was before giving the reins to Jalen Milroe. He's had the opportunity to evolve as a leader, as a quarterback, and I think under this system, under a Clint Kubiak, and learning things from a Sam Darnold who played well last season, it'll only benefit him going forward. And I think he has real potential to be the quarterback of the future for the Seattle Seahawks, despite being a 3rd round pick, because we see the type of potential that he has as a dual threat quarterback. But with all that being said though, guys, before we get further into the video breaking down and answering the question if the Seattle Seahawks can compete in the NFC in the 2025 season, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe and turn on post notifications. We post videos and content here about the NFL, NBA, Marvel, DC, pop culture, all things to that nature. Follow me on Instagram and X/Twitter at Swaggy Russ, on TikTok at SwaggyRuss02 for shorts, reels, all content things of that nature too as well. Also stay tuned for more podcast information that I will be having within the next week in terms of where you can also get audio for this, and more videos and more NFL season previews, and just all the content that I'll have on where you get your podcast, whether it's from Apple or if it's from Spotify. Stay tuned for that, because we're going to have podcast information as well too. But with all that being said, let's answer the question if the Seattle Seahawks can compete in the NFC in this 2025 season. So I think in this video for the Seattle Seahawks, it's important to highlight how much of a defensive mastermind that Mike Macdonald really is as a head coach. Like I said, he's going into his second season, but if you look at his time with the Baltimore Ravens, you can see why he earned the head coaching position of the Seattle Seahawks, even taking the reins from a coach like a Pete Carroll who won a Super Bowl with that franchise and had the type of success that he did. In 2023, that was the season that the Ravens went to the AFC Championship game where they lost to the Kansas City Chiefs, but we can see why he was a hot commodity in the 2024 coaching cycle, as Macdonald's defense with the Ravens in his last year as defensive coordinator there before becoming the Seahawks head coach, they ranked first in points, only allowing 16.5, first in yards per play, first in net yards per pass, third in interceptions, second in touchdown passes allowed, first in rushing touchdowns allowed, also third in scoring percentage, first in expected points added, fifth in turnover percentage, first in takeaways, second in fumbles recovered, seventh on third down defense, and second in terms of defending the red zone. All those stats right there, they really are a testament in terms of not only the personnel that he had, but I would say the coaching really improved the personnel, because the Ravens had a similar personnel last season, but throughout the first half of the season, they really struggled and they were upon the bottom half of the league in terms of the total defensive perspective, but they improved it. But with Mike Macdonald, as I ranked, they had a dominant defense and he really enhanced the scheme. And if you want to talk about from a scheme perspective, Mike Macdonald's defense really integrates a ton of simulated pressure, at times brings 4 to 5, but doesn't blitz as much compared to other teams. And really you can classify his defense as a base defense using a 3-4 nickel zone. Their run defense wasn't necessarily the greatest when he was the coordinator for the Ravens, and with the Seahawks that kind of followed as well too, as they were 16th, so they were just smack dab in the middle in terms of a run defense perspective. But from an overall ranking though, the defense was solid, and you saw Macdonald's culture imprinted right on that team. You can make the argument that the 2024 team for the Seattle Seahawks was very similar to the 2023 team that they assembled, but especially still having a quarterback of a Geno Smith and really the defense being intact. I'd also be remiss if I didn't mention a player like a Devon Witherspoon, who's now going into his third year, I think being one of the better cornerbacks in the league. I think certainly in that top 10 level, and still only 24 years old last season, having 98 total tackles, 66 solo and 23 assisted, having a sack and 1 forced fumble, and then in his rookie year, being a candidate for sure for defensive rookie of the year, but of course Will Anderson Jr. won it that season. In Witherspoon's rookie year, he had 79 total tackles, 56 solo, and 23 assisted, 3 sacks that season, and a pick 6 as well, and along with 16 pass deflections. He had 9 pass deflections last year. But overall though, I believe that Witherspoon, he is continuing to emerge as a really good corner in this league and being amongst one of the best in the league as well, and that's a valuable type of player to have defensively in your secondary. And you make the argument that he will be up for a significant contract extension after the 2025 season, depending on how he plays, but his performance is continuing to trend upward, so that's only a good thing for not only Mike Macdonald and his defense, but the overall franchise for the Seattle Seahawks, hitting on the first round pick in the 2023 draft. To me, this team has the opportunity to be very crafty on defense, similarly how it was in 2024, and also be dominant defensively, creating turnovers and things like that, and setting the tone at the line of scrimmage defensively. But for me, their offense hinges so much this season on the Sam Darnold and what he can do off of his playmakers, and I think he has good playmakers. Like I said, in Minnesota, he had really good playmakers, and they were able to thrive. Only time will tell if Clint Kubiak is going to be able to rekindle and recreate some of that type of success, having playmakers like a Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet, Jackson Smith and Jigma, a 32-year-old Cooper Kupp, players like Marquez Valdez-Scantling, tight ends AJ Barner and Elijah Araro, who was drafted this year in the 2nd round out of Miami, who I would say Elijah Araro, he was actually really good with a Cam Ward this past season. He had 35 receptions for 590 receiving yards and 7 touchdowns, and I'm intrigued to see how often Kubiak is going to use 11 and 12 personnel in his system in terms of running the football first, because I think to be successful for Sam Darnold, you need to be a run first type of team that then thrives with the pass game as well. Like I mentioned earlier, having him drop back 30 to 40 times per game, if you can keep him in that 20 to 25, maybe even 30 area in terms of a pass attempt perspective per game, I think that that's a really good median where the Seahawks need to be to thrive and also dictate things with their running game. But also though, if I compare all the other teams in the NFC West in their division alone, it's hard for me to say that they're going to win a division this year. I'm not going to lie, especially with the questions that I have about a Sam Darnold. And if you haven't checked out all of my other season previews that I talked about for the Rams, the 49ers, and the Cardinals in the NFC West, definitely go check those out. I made the argument that all 3 of those teams have a better shot of making the playoffs than the Seahawks, and that's no knock against them, because I'm not saying that they're going to be bad. I think the NFC is just so tough, and this division is tough as well too, because they always beat on each other. Last year they were 3-3 in the NFC West in their own division, and then this year I could see something certainly similar, because like I said, these teams always are scratching at the surface to make the playoffs. If you look at all 4 4 teams' records last year in the 2024 season, all these teams were close to making the playoffs except for the 49ers. And the 49ers dealt with a lot of injuries, but if you look at 2023, the 49ers, they were in the Super Bowl. In 2022, they were in the conference championship game, and same with 2021. So it's not like they're scrubs. They just had a down year. But the Rams, they were 10-7. Seahawks, they were 10-7. And then the Cardinals, they were 8-9. And I think the Cardinals, they have a good shot to win a division. Don't sleep for sure. I think that this team is really talented on both ends. So that's just another problem to have within the own division. So it's just tough for me to see this team truly getting there in the playoffs unless somehow 3 teams can make the playoffs out of the division. But that's hard to say with divisions like the NFC North and the NFC East, who have a lot of talented teams. The Seattle Seahawks have the 11th easiest strength of schedule. So at that point, I don't think it's necessarily that easy. You're creeping closer to having the average spot in terms of a strength of schedule going into the 2025 season, because they're playing against some solid teams. Like I said, their division alone, it's going to be tough. Their first game is against the San Francisco 49ers at home, though, so that helps for sure, having that 12th man involved, which we all know throughout its reputation in the previous decade plus. The Seahawks certainly have a passionate fan base, and that's a good home game to open things up for the season, to set the tone. Then they play against the Steelers in week 2. That's not an easy game. That's why I said having the 11th easiest schedule in the league really isn't that easy at that point. When you're in the top 5 range, especially like a 49ers, they have the easiest schedule in the league in 2025. That's when you can be like, okay, well, it's very favorable. But 11th overall, you're still playing against some tough teams. So let me get back to the schedule, though. In week 2, they play against the Steelers. That's going to be a hard game regardless of the situation, regardless how you feel about Aaron Rodgers, how he's played the past few years. Even though I think people overrate the type of season that he had last year being bad, I don't think it was that bad. Just were just not good. But that's a tough game going against the Steelers defense with a TJ Watt, Cam Hayward, now a Jalen Ramsey added to that defense as well, too. Not easy at all. And I don't like that for a Sam Darnold, but we'll see, especially with their offensive line, who is ranked 30th according to PFF going into the 2025 season in terms of an offensive line ranking perspective. That's another reason why I do not like things for Sam Darnold this upcoming year, but we'll see when they play against these different pass rushes and run defense and how improved their offensive line can be, because mind you, they did draft Ray Zabel in the first round, 18th overall, guard from North Dakota State, who will be able to help in the running game and also from a pass blocking perspective too. I like that pick, but one player on the offensive line isn't going to be able to cover the other 4 spots. We'll see, but I think Ray Zabel is certainly a solid player. But that game against the Steelers is going to be tough. They play the Saints in week 3. They should win that, in my opinion. And like I said, the Cardinals, that's going to be a tough game. Every single game in the NFC West. I mean, they can win in a blowout. It just happens. You never know any given Sunday, but it's not going to be easy. I think the Cardinals are going to be really good this year. Just watch. Buccaneers, that's going to be a tough game. Jaguars, they should win that, but you never know. Like I said, things happen, and the Jaguars have reinforcements, and they still have some solid players on their defense, like a Josh Hines, Allen. Then they play against the Texans. That won't be an easy game at all. That'll be facing a potential top 5 defense in Houston. Play against the Commanders, who made the NFC Championship game last season. Then play the Cardinals again. The Rams, that'll be tough as well too. They play against the Titans. That should be a dub in my estimation. Then Sam Darnold will be playing against his former team in the Vikings on November 30th. That'll be an intriguing game there to see how that goes. That'll take place in Seattle, so that's an advantage there for them. Then they'll play against the Falcons. That's a tough and competitive team there regardless, and they added to their defense, which really struggled a lot last season, and we already know the type of playmakers they have offensively, and Michael Penix Jr. going into a full season starting. That'll be something to see as well. That won't be an easy game. They play against the Colts. We'll see how things go, whether they decide to start Anthony Richardson or a Daniel Jones. The Rams again, then they play against the Panthers and the 49ers. So I'm not gonna lie, this schedule reeks of a 9-8 season. It just really does, in my opinion, because if I want to count wins, I see 8-9. You can make the argument they can win 10 games, but just to me, I think that there's a good dose of games that I can see them losing, particularly in their division. When I see teams improving, like the Cardinals even more, the Rams, I think they're still going to be really good. There's a lot of questions for sure with this Matthew Stafford injury in his back, but there's still like 4 weeks before the season starts, and I think that he's going to end up being fine, and they still have a lot of weapons offensively and an improved defense too that was already really good through the stretch last year. Then the Cardinals, like I said, they're going to be really good, and then the 49ers, I think that as long as they're 80% to 90% healthy, they have a great chance to be a wild card team. So you're competing against teams like that in your own division. It's hard for me to say that you're going to dominate the other teams that you're playing against not in your division. I just think that the Seattle Seahawks are going to go 9-8 this year and miss the playoffs, and that sucks because they were just 10-7 last year, but that's not a testament to them saying that they're not good. It's just that they need more, in my opinion. I just don't think that they pushed the needle in terms of some of the moves that they've made. They've drafted well, they added some solid free agents, but I don't think that they have a team to necessarily compete at a high level in NFC. The question in this video is if they can compete in the NFC this season. Yeah, they can compete, but can they compete to be a wild card? Can they compete compete to, win a division in NFC West? Can they compete to be a Super Bowl contender? I still think they're a couple of ways away from doing that. I think that they'll be at a similar level that they were last season in terms of being close to being a wild card team, but being still a little bit far from making the playoffs and being a team that we see being a real threat. But I've been wrong before for sure. Like I said, I'm not buying Sam Darnold as a quarterback for this team in the long term, and even in terms of playing at a similar level that he did last year in Minnesota to Seattle in 2025, because it's just two different schemes. You're talking about Kevin O'Connell, who's arguably a top 5 coach in the NFL right now, then going to a defensive minded head coach who I mentioned, his defenses are great, but you're also getting plays from a Clint Kubiak who isn't the same type of play caller as Kevin O'Connell. Yes, he's spent time in Minnesota, but everyone has their own identity and how they change things and their philosophies with their offense. And I just think that the Seahawks, they're going to be really competitive. They're going to be a really solid team that you hate to play against, but I just don't necessarily see them in terms of being this huge playoff threat that has a chance to win a wild card playoff game and make the division run. I just think they're maybe a year away from that, and maybe a Jalen Milroe type of ascension from doing that, because like I said, I buy a lot of stock in terms of a Jalen Milroe being a long-term solution for the Seattle Seahawks at the quarterback position. But if Sam Darnold can thrive like he did last year, then I'll shut up and be quiet, because that'll be a good thing for Seattle, if anything. And y'all should really wish that, but only time will tell. But with that being said, though, let me know what y'all think in the comments down below. Do y'all believe that the Seattle Seahawks will compete at a high level in this 2025 season? I think that they're going to be a really tough team to play against, really gritty offensively and defensively, being a team that makes you earn every yard at the line of scrimmage, whether it's from their defense or offensively, them pounding the rock and playing in play action. But I still think they're a little ways away from being a real playoff contender that you can for sure slot in, being one of those final spots in the NFC. And I think it's still hard for me to see them winning the NFC West this upcoming year. But like I said, I could be wrong. Y'all let me know what y'all think. That's it for previewing all the NFC West teams, our third division done. Next, we'll be moving on to the AFC West, starting off things, of course, with the Kansas City Chiefs. Where would we start anywhere else with? Then talking about teams like the Chargers, the Broncos, and then the Raiders before moving on to the NFC South. So looking forward to that. This has been a great journey for sure so far. A lot of great work in terms of doing research on these teams to make sure I'm providing not only informative, but accurate analyzing to these teams to preview their upcoming 2025 season, because there's a lot of talent in the NFL. I mean, obviously everyone is talented, but assessing truly where these teams will potentially rank and perform this upcoming year, I think it's been challenging but rewarding in terms of finding the work to predict how they'll truly perform in this upcoming season. And in the NFC West, particularly finishing this video off, I think it's going to be a fun and tough division in the 2025 season. Make sure you hit the like button and subscribe and turn on post notifications. Like I said, connect with me on Instagram and Twitter /X at SwaggyRuss, TikTok at SwaggyRuss02 for shorts, reels, all things like that. If you want to talk about NFL, NBA, Marvel, DC pop culture, all stuff like that, hit me up, guys. I'm always available and here for y'all guys. And like I said, stay tuned for more content and videos, because there's a lot coming and a lot of great things in the works. So y'all stay tuned for sure. Make sure that you know that you matter, and that you are keeping Jesus Christ at the center of your life. He is at the door knocking, guys. You just have to let him in. It'll be the best decision that you've ever made, guys. Love you all. Thank you for your support always. Y'all keep being blessed, keep being legendary, keep being amazing. Know that you have purpose and you are awesome. Truly. Y'all have a good one. Peace.